and welcome to another episode of Recovery Matters. This is a show of Lowell House, and during these sessions we've talked about a lot of interesting things, a lot of important things around addiction and recovery, and especially the opioid crisis that we're all going through. So tonight's topic is everyone knows someone, and everyone does. Everyone has someone that has an addiction issue, a brother, father, mother, sister, friend, colleague. It is so widespread that we want to try to tackle a few questions today and find out why it is that way and what kinds of things we can do about it. And at the end of this episode, we have a great little 4-minute film done by Lowell House and done by a great filmmaker, Jay Barry, called Everyone Knows Someone. So stay tuned, you're going to like that very much. So we have some guests today, as we do every week. On my right is John Livingston, and John is the Director of Residential Recovery at Lowell House for our sober houses and our residences. Across from me is DA Marion Ryan, our friend and a great advocate for people with addiction issues in this community, a great leader, so we're very pleased to have you here. And Terry Downs, and Terry, I think are you the Director of Homeland Security? Is
Yes.
that your official title?
Yes.
Which really doesn't say much about what you actually do, though, Terry.
No, it doesn't.
You're involved in so many things in Lowell and do
Right.
so many things so well. So when we walked in here, it was like old home week. Terry knows everyone. So as does DA Ryan. So we're going to talk about Everyone Knows Someone, as I mentioned. So I think the first question, and the question, I actually get two questions a lot. The first question is always, how did we get here? I mean, I didn't even know there was an addiction problem 10 years ago, and suddenly everyone's talking about addictions. And the other one, of course, is, and I'm sure you all get this a lot, is, see, I have a cousin who has an addiction problem. What can I do? So let's start with the first one, and I'm gonna go over to Marion and start with that, about how did we get here?
Well, I think we got here through a couple of routes. I think the first was just our increased use of opiates in general. Probably 15, 20 years ago when hospitals began considering pain as the fifth vital sign. So they weren't just checking your pulse and respiration, they wanted to know what your pain was. Those kind of little charts we're all familiar with, the smiley face to the sad face, pick one. And when people were in pain, the medical community really sought to reduce that pain. And opiates are good pain relievers. So we first increased the amount of opiates that are on the street. The United States uses about 98% of the opiates in the world.
Right.
So there were opiates out there, and the problem is they're expensive. So when people were using them, at some point it probably became too expensive, or they no longer had a prescription. And one of the interesting things is during this time, heroin, which 20 years ago, 25 years ago in Lowell was selling for $50 or $60 a bag, is now selling for $2 to $5 a bag. So it's become a good substitute for opiates. So that's part of the issue that's gotten us to this point.
So I think we'll go to Terry, but I want to come back and talk a little bit about, should we be banning opiates? Is that an option that we have? Because there is a group that's got several thousand signatures to do that very piece. So Terry, a little bit about the history, because I've been watching some shows like Narcos and get a sense of how the drugs kind of infiltrated into this country. And of course, the obvious question is, why can't we stop other countries from infiltrating drugs into this country?
Well, there's two ways they get into the country. The first is perfectly legally. Big pharmaceutical companies make these things. They make millions of them every month, and they're most anxious to sell them because the profits are very high. And as the district attorney mentioned, maybe 15 years ago, when pain started to be controlled on a much more regular basis by the medical community, the pharmaceutical community was right in there helping them out by producing things like OxyContin and oxycodone,
Right.
which are wonderful medications to stop severe pain, for instance, people who have cancer. But they then started to expand the marketing of them, and they started doing a lot of television marketing. So every night, all night long on TV, you see ads for ask your doctor about this medicine, ask your doctor about that medicine. And it worked well with the effort to try to reduce pain because they tried to normalize the idea that pain is not a normal part,
And those people
not a
look-
normal part of human living. And of course, pain is always a part of human living.
And those people look so happy.
They
until
do
you
look
hear about
happy.
the side effects at
Yeah.
the end.
Exactly. The illegal side is when people in other countries typically people who produce heroin and related drugs in Afghanistan and in Mexico take advantage of the fact that we have enormous borders and it's very difficult to control them, to smuggle all sorts of drugs into the country. It's easy to say, let's just build a wall, but think about just the Mexican border for
Right,
a moment.
right.
It's about 1,800 miles of land area. It's mountains, it's deserts. It's not as easy as just putting up a fence and you keep on going. It's very difficult to do. You can do it in certain stretches for 15, 20 miles here or there, but to do 1,800 miles of a very high wall
Absolutely.
that nobody's going to get across, even from an engineering point of view, frankly, it really doesn't make sense. So the effort is by the operation of the federal government to try to control as much of the illegal inflow as is possible. But you're never going to seal it off. And that just talks about the Mexican border bill. We're not talking about a 3,000 mile water border on the East Coast, a 3,000 mile water border on the West Coast, the whole Gulf of Mexico, and a 5,000 mile border with Canada.
Right,
So
right.
It's just not possible. It sounds great. As a soundbite, it just sounds
It makes
terrific.
good campaign speeches,
It makes
doesn't it?
great campaign speeches. It doesn't work in reality.
Yeah.
In small bites, yes, but over a 25,000 mile total border, no, it doesn't work.
Absolutely, good point. So what about Lowell? Why Lowell, John?
Why Lowell? Lowell is a community, and it's part of the Merrimack Valley. Is sort of from here to Lawrence, part of a gateway in terms of people come from really all over New England, and drugs come in and out of this area. And so it's kind of become a hot spot in that sense, based on geography for some reason, demand. And so usually urban inner city cities are where this sort of activity and addiction will sort of really take place. It wouldn't make sense. You wouldn't see it in Chelmsford. It would make more sense in a bigger city. And then Lowell historically, going back to the 90s, had a big crack problem in those days, along with other cities in
Wasn't there a
Massachusetts.
film about that?
There was a film, HBO series, a film, High on Crack Street. And so it shifted from crack now back into heroin, whereas heroin was big earlier on and then started to phase out. As the DA said, that with the cost of it, it shifted, and now it's reemerged because of the cost of OxyContin and other drugs become harder to get. At $80 a pill for OxyContin at 80 milligrams, and heroin at $4 or $5 a bag is cheaper than a 6-pack of beer.
Right.
And so, so this is a confluence of a number of issues. Historically also, funding for treatment has not kept pace with the demand for addiction. And so now we're trying to catch up to a problem that's really 20 years in the making, and trying to catch up with the funding and the resources to treat people with it. So.
Yeah, and it's funny, John mentions about how it's cheaper than a 6-pack of beer, which it is.
It is.
But many kids also tell cops and therapists that if I'm walking down the street with a 6-pack of beer or a case of beer, the cops can see me.
Right.
If I'm walking down the street with heroin in my pocket, nobody has any clue I have
That's
it
right.
because
That's right.
it's so tiny, so it's easy to walk it right down the street.
Well, and of course the beer is legal.
And the
so-
beer is legal.
So that's a good question. And John, maybe tell us a little bit about, because we don't talk a lot about this now. We talk a lot about the opioid crisis. But 58% of the people that walk into our programs are alcoholics. What about the alcoholics in this?
It's still there. I mean, that problem has not changed. It's just become shadowed because the opioid problem is really so fatal. Whereas alcoholism is a disease that slowly kills people,
Right.
other than drunk driving and some other more serious issues like that. But whereas a young person can the first or second time try heroin and be dead. It's not the same addiction. It doesn't have the same effect as alcohol does, which usually takes much more of a over the lifetime of a person, 10 years, 15 years before they sometimes come to treatment, whereas it could be a first or second time for somebody to use heroin or something and be dead. And so, but you're right, we actually interviewed a guy today at our recovery home who's 48 and only an alcoholic, and I say that only because you just don't see that as much anymore.
Right.
That's usually the older folks that present for treatment that are strictly alcoholic. But those numbers are still there. They're just overshadowed by the crisis, the opioid crisis.
And what we've certainly seen in some of our public policy forums where we've brought together people who are in the throes of addiction or are on the road to recovery, kind of going backwards to see when did they start, what started them. Virtually everyone we talked to started with alcohol and marijuana.
Right.
Those were the, we don't find people who their first drug use was heroin.
Right.
They just don't. It's other things. They progress fairly rapidly, but they begin with alcohol.
Yeah, and that's a very common story for people. And we know that people under the age of 21 or 22, if they use marijuana regularly, increase their chance of becoming addicted later in life by 40%. I mean, that's a pretty good NIDA, National Institute of Drug Abuse figure. So then the question becomes, what about legalizing marijuana?
Well, that's why it's such an iffy proposition. There's this idea out there that it's not a dangerous drug. You don't get addicted to it. You just get a nice high, and everybody's happy. And I'm sure there's a lot of people for whom that's true, but there's a lot of people for whom that's not true either. The effort to legalize medicinal use had two components to it, and obviously it's now legal for medicinal use under certain circumstances in Massachusetts.
And we have what, 2 dispensaries? 1 dispensary here in Lowell.
One dispensary in Lowell. There were some people who advocated for that because they really wanted people who had ailments and who were suffering to get access to it when doctors said they should get access to it. But let's face it, there were a lot of people for whom that was a convenient cover to say, oh, it's only for medicinal purposes, sort of laughing behind their back. A lot of those people, and it wasn't everybody, but it was a lot of people who supported that movement, really were driving towards full legalization of marijuana. Now we have an effort to fully legalize marijuana, and the two build on each other. For a lot of people, it won't be a problem. But for thousands of people in Massachusetts, this is going to be a huge problem.
Well, especially younger people.
Younger people who don't realize the dangers of it, who use it in an uncontrolled way, and for whom it will lead to worse things. So I think we have to take a very clear-eyed view of this. Maybe the electorate says this is the way to go, and if so, then that's the way we'll go. But let's not kid ourselves that there won't be any bad consequences, because there will be for a lot of people.
I think that's a very good point. Thank you. So question number 3 I get frequently is, and I just got this the other day, and I'm always a little surprised because I think we're fairly down the road in understanding addictions, is why can't these people control themselves? For God's sakes, they just want to get high and have fun all the time. So how do we respond to that?
Well, I think what we know from the physiological piece of addiction is that it becomes something, particularly when you're addicted to opioids, you are at some level pretty quickly using opioids just to get yourself to, quote, feeling normal. You know, people think about opioid addiction as sort of 4 glasses of wine at a wedding, but one of the things that we know about opioids is that you develop a tolerance and it gets harder and harder to even stay at a baseline. You're using more and more, it's costing more and more. I mean, that's one of the reasons that people so quickly can go down the well of addiction when you talk about opioids.
Absolutely.
No, absolutely. When people become dependent, it's much different than use, abuse, and dependence. When you look at it from that perspective, and that develops over time. And so, historically in this country, we had the model for treating addiction as a moral model. People were bad people that needed to get good. We finally the research has borne out that it's a brain disease, a brain disorder, and that people have altered brain chemistry. And so we need to treat it as such. And so we're finally starting to move beyond the moral issue that people are bad and need to get good, and that they're sick and need to get well. Right. So.
And of course, down the road, that's where the cravings come from, because people never quite recover the full way. So we look at addiction as something across a lifetime that people have to do, because they do get the cravings and they do relapse. An average person, John, how many times in a lifetime will an average person relapse?
It varies from people in addiction, severity of addiction. It's usually percentages. Probably more than 50% would be 10 times, 12 times or more.
Yeah.
Other people, we've had folks that have been in 80 detoxes, 90 detoxes, and so for some people it's much harder, and for other people they seem to get it quicker. And so it's hard to know who's going to get it quicker and who's not. But it's a very low percentage that come to treatment one time and don't pick up again. That's a very small number.
So you can never give up, no matter what.
Absolutely. I've worked with people that have been 200 detoxes and got sober and didn't drink again. So,
And we have a very interesting woman who came a few years ago, and she was 91, and said she was, she was not well. She had suffered all her life. She was an alcoholic all her life. Never really went into recovery. Lost her family. Lost a lot of the things she had, and said, "I just don't want to die an alcoholic. I want to recover, and I want to face my children and face the community and say I'm clean and sober, and then I can die comfortably." So I think this is a lifetime fight for so many people. So one of the issues I think that we also hear, and that's sort of question number 4, I'm going to hear these all at the July 4th party, is, look, we put people in jail. Why can't they just be treated there, then they're cured, then they come out? Why keep them in the community where they're going to steal or cause problems? So why not just lock them all up?
Well, I think for a few reasons. And first of all, there are people who that is where they begin their treatment. And in Massachusetts, particularly in Middlesex County, I think the facilities, the sheriffs have done a good job of providing treatment inside the institutions. First of all, we would hope to get to people before they're at their stage where they're being committed. We want to be doing early intervention and prevention, and then certainly addressing people's addiction before it gets them to the place where they're committing the kinds of crime that are sending them to jail. And the second piece is, even if you inside the institution could get somebody to detox and get them to be sober, one of the issues is when you go back into the same neighborhood, if you haven't done the sort of counseling and emotional work, you're very likely to find yourself just right back where you were before. So, many people will say who've recovered that you have to have a whole change of life, that they can no longer on Friday night hang with the same friends or go to the same people's houses because they're just likely to find themselves back in the same habits.
And I'll invite you all now, including you, John. On the 27th of June at Fusion, we are going to have a premiere showing of a wonderful film called Beyond the Walls. And it actually stars our friend and our reentry case manager, Louis Diaz. And it's an hour film that is just a wonderful film in terms of talking about the addiction issue, what it means to be incarcerated, and how when you get out, you just need the services, and incarceration really doesn't work. So the question now is, we got just only about a couple of minutes left. How can we beat this thing? That's the 5th question. What can I do to beat this thing and eliminate addictions?
I think we have taken a very multi-pronged approach, and we've certainly taken that approach here in Lowell, which is you can't focus solely on the person who's in addiction now and not be doing any of the other pieces. You have to really be doing a lot of things simultaneously. We've got to be in the schools. We know that use now is beginning at roughly age 10 to 14. So, when I started in the DA's office, we went to high school and trained kids. Then we went to junior high. Now we're in the elementary schools. So we've got to be doing that piece. We need to be doing prevention work. We've bought for the police departments things like the drug disposal boxes, so we're getting rid of those. We need to be doing aggressive education in the community. Things like we've partnered with real estate brokers for when you're selling your house, make sure there are no drugs around in the house. Good. Legislation, we filed legislation to address it. Treatment, we've worked very hard with some of the treatment providers here and across the county in terms of making more treatment available. And then also the other piece, which is, enforcement, the stopping what Terry mentioned, the movement, the big time movement of those products. We did a seizure recently up in the Merrimack Valley, over 30 kilos. That's a lot of product that's not on the street.
That is. Good. Well, maybe one of the answers to that question is we could start by electing the right officials who are going to do something about it. So well done, Marion. Last comment, Terry.
I think that it's a long-term proposition that we're facing. This is a generational issue. It's not going to be over quickly. Just as John was saying with alcohol, people think of alcohol as a very long-term disease, alcoholism as a very long-term disease. This is a long-term disease as well, and it's not going to be over quickly, but we have to keep at it every day, little by little. We have to be tough on the people who sell large quantities of drugs to make money, but we have to have a little bit of compassion too for the people who are hooked on these drugs.
John, last comment?
Some additional resources for treatment.
Absolutely. Double, triple those resources, because we're going to need them all. Well, listen, absolutely, everyone, stay tuned, because you're going to see this great film. Everyone knows someone, and we'll move forward and do that. And again, I'd like to invite you all to see the premiere of the film, Beyond the Walls. You will be changed by this film when you see it. And it is at Fusion, which is at the Old Jean d'Arc Church. Right?
Okay.
Okay, I'll ask some Llewellyans here, not for us blow-ins. It'll start at 6 o'clock on June 27th, and we'll be very happy to have you. We got plenty of room, and you get to meet some of the people that are in the film. So again, I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. Stay tuned for our film, and thank D.A. Ryan and Terry Downs from the college and John Livingston from Lowell House, and thank you, everyone. Take care. And remember, recovery matters. I've got to say that.
3 days before the election, my son, our middle child who plays football for Union College, broke his arm against Hobart. And so I said to my son, I basically said, don't take it. Whatever they give you, don't take it. Just grit your teeth, bite on, whatever you need to bite on, but don't go there. And the good news is he didn't, and he's fine, and actually he's back playing football again.
It was in 2010 when my son was 17 that I found out that he was addicted to prescription pills.
I remember asking, where do I go? What are the detoxes? And being told, just go to the emergency room. And then going to the emergency room and sitting there for 8 to 10 hours without any help.
They all know, but we've also lost 3 family members.
And they were just like, really? There's a problem in Tewksbury? We have no idea.
And it was just a constant, hustle trying to get money and then using, and I wanted to die.
I shouldn't even be here. I should be dead with the stunts that I pulled and how deep I was into active addiction.
And how's your sister still in your life? Helping you?
Yeah. In the military, there was a lot of drinking, usage of drugs to deal with the pressures, especially as a woman. So when I came back and I got out of the military, I can remember my father picking me up at the airport, and the first thing I wanted to do was have a drink at the airport and celebrate.
I had a drinking problem, I crashed my car, I got divorced, I was fired from my job. Like, every list of horrible things that could happen happened, and none of those things define who I am.
And so when you're feeling really bad about yourself, when you have no self-esteem, no self-respect, and after a while you can start to internalize that after you on this path. And so when you come some years later, it starts to happen for you, and it happens for other people, and then you start to give that back to other people and help them.
But I have to take myself out of the element because I can't do it alone. Like, I need places like this, because...
The challenge of the work, really, the overall challenge, is to move people through the darkness and the loneliness of addiction to living in the light.
Then after I got sober, I do so much better work now than I ever did. And in fact, looking back now, it's a little embarrassing, the work I did at the end, because it was sloppy and unfocused, and I wasn't present for the moments that I needed to be.
I went through the recovery home model. I believe in it. I believe very strongly in recovery and rehabilitation.
And at some point, these individuals will come around. I'm a person in long-term recovery, so it's something that I want to share with others and let other people know that there is a way out, that recovery is real.
And we need to show that more and more each day as we're facing this huge epidemic in our community with drugs and alcohol, that recovery is real and it does happen. And I'm living proof that it is.
The sharing of that information promotes education on addiction, awareness. It will lessen the stigma, because people need to realize this is anybody's family.
When you came here, suddenly you could tell people what was going on, and people could start helping, could help you cope. And it really did help me cope, and it saved my life in many ways, because I was as sick as my Zach.
Every aspect of my life has done a 180. Every single thing. And I put my trust into the people that came before me and the people that were at the Lowell House, and I did whatever I had to do, and I'm so grateful for it because it gave me this life that I never thought was possible.
We have a very close friend who was an alcoholic for 40 years.
My brother was able to do that. He has a great life for himself now.
My son became addicted to opiate prescriptions and then had turned to heroin.
My learned behaviors are from a mother who is an alcoholic.
I'm also the mom of an addict that unfortunately passed away.
Their son, daughter, sister, brother, mother.
My daughter did not survive this disease.